Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me, I have a returning good brother into the temple, coming to us from Tab Creations, the madman behind the many entries in the Saga Machine universe. Now revisiting Age of Ambition with the campaign/expansion Strange Bedfellows. The one and only Thorin Tabor. How you doing today, man?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm glad that we are long since out of summer. On the other hand, it means the return of road construction, so mulligan. But it has been good, and I do want to give my congrats for how well Strange Bedfellows is doing. You were shooting for about 1,200, and it's currently at 1,567 at the time we're doing this.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we're on the cusp of reaching our first stretch goal, so I'm hoping we'll hit that very soon.
Just to make sure. Okay, that's not actually wood, but it's the closest I get. At least within arm's reach. So Lord knows I don't want to add to any jinxing. So, as I said before, and as you point out very early on in it, Strange Bedfellows is both a campaign and a source book. So, I suppose the first question that I'd ask, I should note it's campaign and source book for Age of Ambition, which we've covered here in this channel previously. Did it start out as you wanting to do both at the same time, or was it a case where there was a chicken and then the egg?
It's a bit of a chicken and the egg, but if I had to pick one, I think the desire to do the campaign really kind of started it, and then as we began to flesh out the campaign, we realized we needed more of a source book on the area where it takes place, and the various factions at play there.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. Now, Strange Bedfellows, I remember when I first saw the pitch for Strange Bedfellows, and one of the big things was essentially running a fantasy city. And I know on the I keep saying Kickstarter, but that's just habit. But I know that you had brought up on More Pork in the Discworld universe, which appropriate timing that we're talking about that. along with a few others. But there are some tabletop games that are leading into that city management that I'm curious if you had dipped into as far as inspiration. I think one of the big ones would be Birthright.
I have the original Birthright box set from 2nd edition. I was a big fan of that back in the day. It's a little bit different in that, like in Birthright, your party's not collectively running the same city so much as they each have their own like little fief, but there's a fair amount of inspiration there.
And it wouldn't be too difficult to turn individual fiefs into individual districts of a city.
Oh yeah, no, it's not too big of a job.
I'm from Minnesota, and nobody refers to Minneapolis and St. Paul as the individual city. It's always the Twin Cities.
Yeah.
Don't ask me why that's the case. It just is. If I had to guess, it's largely because your choice of preferred city would be enough to start a fight back in like the 50s.
Yeah.
So I joke about that, but that's not far removed from the truth of the matter. Some of those fights could get real nasty. There's whole books written about that kind of thing. But I'm curious if since you mentioned it was that chicken and egg thing. When it came to the idea of running a city, did you already have a particular kind of city in mind, and what kind of tone for that city did you want to go for?
Well, when you say the particular city in mind, I had a particular city in the fantasy world of Age of Ambition in mind. This isn't really like parallel real world cities or anything like that. But I won't go for a tone where it's kind of a new city, and it's really kind of on the edge of it's got a little bit of a boomtown atmosphere in a sense, and I'm not saying it's on the edge of civilization, but it's certainly on the edge of stability and instability, where it can kind of go either way, and that gives different ways that gives different ways that your party or the various other movers and shakers who are non-player characters can push things, or exploit, for that matter.
Oh yeah, I can get that. And since I mentioned the whole districts thing, I'm guessing when it comes to exploring the city of Melanoth, you have it divided into different districts or sections.
Yeah, it's divided into several different districts, and there's also other organizations that your individual player characters can represent, which are big factions within the city that don't necessarily map to a like sector of the city so much as it's like a more of a power behind the throne sort of thing.
Yeah, which sides of the movers and shakers like you, and which ones like to hate you.
Exactly.
Now, to further get into Melanoth, would you say that this is since you mentioned it's a frontier-like city, is it one that would be next to some body of water or some nearby some mine or some kind of very, very significant resource like that?
Yeah, it's actually up in the mountains on an isthmus, if I'm pronouncing that right. So narrow stretch of land that connects two bodies of water. Connects or borders two bodies of water. Whatever. That's one of those words I see written and not pronounced. But yeah. So there's mining as a resource there, or the two bodies of water, and there's one of the plot hooks involves specifically the possibility of building a canal across it.
Yeah, and part of the reason I bring that up is with those kind of towns, especially ones that are frontier ones, being a trading hub is one of the big reasons why those towns get so big, because a lot of people are going back and forth and either buying goods or getting rid of goods that they made outside of that area.
Absolutely.
And maybe there's a bit of bias on my end, but I keep thinking of some of the frontier towns during that first big expansion in North American history. Whenever everybody's trying to go westward, you have this mix of more civilized elements and more uncivilized elements.
Oh yeah, there's very much that going on with civilized and uncivilized elements, and just how much influence the various people trying to push it different ways have, and what they can do to back it up if push comes to shove.
Yeah. Now, the campaign for Strange Bedfellows, you describe it as 7 core scenarios. Are those scenarios meant to be played in like a specific order, or are they any order?
So those 7 core scenarios more or less have an order. They form basically the kind of like backbone arc of the campaign. And then there's a whole bunch of side quest scenarios that don't have a specific order that can slot in there. I think the big inspiration that I've taken away in a lot of my campaign design is I like Pinnacle's sort of like plot point campaigns, where there's like a few sort of like main dramatic beats for the overall arc of the campaign, and then a lot of player agency and where they go, kind of between these points.
the way you describe it, it sounds like the tiers and tentpoles approach that was used in the old Gargoyles cartoon.
Yeah.
That's which was tiers and tentpoles, which is not the term I came up with. That was the term by the writing team. Was a way to compromise with the writing team and for Gargoyles and the studio and thus the television stations, because TV networks really did not like serialization. Nowadays they claim to love it, but I think they had to be dragged kicking and screaming to that. They like the notion of being able to put any old episode wherever they want. I think that's the reason why sitcoms lasted as long as they did. But the compromise was a kind of two-tier setup with episodes. Some episodes you could put in any order, but only between certain tentpole episodes, certain plot episodes that have some significance moving forward. And it sounds like you've got something similar with the core scenarios and side quest adventures. Would that be correct?
No, that's a very good way of explaining it. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, when I first found out about that term, I was like, that is so brilliant, I'm gonna need to steal that. And you know how it is, great artists steal.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to the notion of ruling a domain, which is obviously going to be a big thing, I think one of the tricky parts that can happen with that is setting that up so the player characters are some degree of ruler, whether it be through completion of an early quest or they start out as such. Do you have some suggestions in the book as far as how to get player characters to that point where they are rulers?
There are some suggestions early on at the very beginning in character creation, and there's a built-in hook, that the GM can either take or leave to kind of like explain why the player characters are rulers here. But otherwise the character creation chapter kind of at the beginning of the campaign assumes you're building with the idea that your character is going to be a ruler in the first place. And there are guidelines there for that.
Alright, I can get that. Now, one of the other things that was in that bullet point setup was extended warfare and criminal trials. Now, with extended warfare, are we talking like large group on group skirmishes, or are we talking small armies? Like, what would be the scale for that kind of extended warfare?
The scale's probably in the small armies setup of things. So in our domain management rules, there you have a certain amount of political capital to get your way, and then you've got a certain amount of like city resources to put towards developing things, and one of those ways you can put the resources into defense in a sense. And that will give you your different units or whatever there in this sort of like small army scale. If there's conflict on that scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can get that. It's one of those scale is important when it comes to dealing with that sort of warfare system, because on some angles you could have it where the war scenario is like a couple of gangs against each other, or whole armies trying to assault or defend a city. So having that understanding of scale is important. Now, the other avenue is criminal trials. I think when people hear that, they're going to have the image in their mind of something like a courtroom drama, and this is where things could get tricky. Because you look at a lot of courtroom dramas, whether it be in book, in film, in movie, or whatnot, and a lot of it is two-person chamber plays, essentially. In some cases, literal chamber plays. But the problem with those sort of duet role plays is you've got everybody else at the table is just checking their phones because they're not engaged in that. You see the same problem with like hacking mechanics in a lot of cyberpunk games.
Yeah.
So, when it comes to criminal trials, how do you manage it so that the whole table gets involved instead of it being a duet?
So, really, it boils down to it builds off of our extended action mechanic. But basically, it boils down to a set of 3 roles with some recommended role playing attached to it. So you might, for example, like role play out a blanking on the term now. You're sort of like intro argument, even if it's just like 3 lines of it or something like that, and maybe the GM will give you a boon or a bane or something like that, depending on how well you play it. But and then you make your flip, and then other people can step in with questioning witnesses or concluding an argument or whatever. Even if you just role play a couple quips of that, and then add the boon or a bane. But really, the idea is to like add some role playing element and then keep it moving along, because I wouldn't. Well, you can keep role playing it if everyone's having a good time, but otherwise, I want to not let it drag on, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I can get.
And also, it's also got a couple mechanics in there that can interrupt it for surprise evidence or stuff like that.
In that same vein, I'm assuming that the role of the judge would be played by the GM.
That's the assumption. That it's being played by it's a non-player character judge essentially.
Yeah, which I'd say is going to be fair, because if the judge was played by any of the PCs, that might cause a bit of bias.
Oh yeah, I mean honestly, if the judge is a PC at that point, I would just say ignore the system, make your ruling, because I wouldn't want to step on the player's agency in that regard. But that just might be more my play style there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah, I can get that. And given that, I think we should go into the nitty gritty about domain management and how it's going to work within the system. Is it a case where a domain is sort of a macro character?
It basically is in a lot of ways. You at the very beginning of the campaign, each of the PCs is going to get, it's called a position of power, and it could be like city councilor, it could be like secret head of the thieves guild in the city. You're one of these movers and shakers that effectively end up controlling the city, and the system breaks down into politics rounds, which is like a month of game time essentially, or corresponds to the monthly council meeting that ends it. And there's you can update some points, but basically your domain, for your domain, you'll get some amount of city influence, which is your political capital. And then you can spend that city influence to do certain things. And what you can do with it depends on what it is you are playing, and what other developments you have made to your domain, in a sense that will give you new options going forward.
Yeah, and when it comes to developments, how would those particularly work? Is it akin to building developments in like an RTS, where you're spending resources but you're also dealing with time?
Yeah, that's. I mean, you're basically, to get those developments, you're putting some amount of your city influence towards it, and then usually time, or in some cases there's some other specific thing that needs done in the campaign.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can certainly get that. Now, given that, I'm guessing that there's. You mentioned earlier there's this idea of each player character handling a different district or area within the city. would each of those individual ones have their own sets of advantages and disadvantages, or things that are easier to work with than others?
Yeah, there are. There's a big list that the players can choose from at the beginning of the campaign, or some guidelines for the GM, sort of like rolling their own if nothing fits. And when it comes to their advantages and disadvantages, and what sort of things they can do with their influence off the bat.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. So, with that in mind, when it comes to running an organization, would that work on similar rules as like domain management?
Yeah. That's
all right.
It does.
And what would be a few examples of some of the organizations that would be in the book, or is there going to be a system for creating a whole new organization?
So there's some guidelines for the GM specifically, creating different organizations if they want something else there. But there's a bunch that come in the book, and we just built my draft right now. So there is you could be the speaker of the city council. You can be Archmage of Melanoc, have some sort of like arcane dominion there. You could be the commissioner of the guard. The Knight Principal of the Circle of Honor, which is this big sort of like Knights Errant organization in the setting. You could be the secret, head of the Thieves Guild, where your identity is unknown. You could be mayor of one of the outlying settlements that are subject to the city-state. Oracle of one of 3 different religious organizations. Or a Marshal of the Legion is another one. I think there's also a mercantile magnate option.
Yeah. And I'm guessing with each of them, there's a short list of the other factions that they get along with, and the ones that they have some friction.
That's right.
Which would certainly make sense. Because everybody's on this city doesn't mean they're all going to get along, and most of the time they're not. Now, when it comes to new character options, what's being brought to the table on that front?
So in terms of new character options, there are rules for starting your character. So these. The characters in this campaign aren't assumed to be your typical starting characters. They're people who are more established or advanced than usual. So we've got some new options for creating, more established, more powerful characters off the bat. We also have these various positions of power you can pick. We've got something called a bonds sheet. So when you end up getting a contact or an ally or a rival or something like that, you can. There's this big list of these important NPCs in the city that you can pick from, or if you can always make up your own if nothing fits. But that kind of like it lets you look over this list and say, okay, these people might be important to the campaign, so it might be helpful to pick one of these if you want, because they're going to come up and they're going to have an effect on things, and that gives you kind of like ties right off the bat. There's also, since Age of Ambition has a life path system, there's also new life path options for having come up through the city guard, or the Legion, or being a guild thief, which I think are the 3 new life path pursuits we have.
And which is important to note, because I believe Age of Ambition much like a lot of the Saga Machine games, is semi-freeform. Like it's not full freeform. This isn't some GURPS or something like that, but it's meant to be fairly open in terms of how one creates their character within certain archetypes.
Yeah. You're essentially, at least Age of Ambition has these sort of like life path tables where you're you're more or less picking them, and they'll cost you some number of points. So it ends up being sort of a directed point build where you have events in the life path that can affect you, and your choices kind of from the menus there that they provide.
Now, shifting into the whole side quest things. When it comes to side quest adventures, would they be a few pages long, or would they be a one-page affair like some of those one-shots in Savage Worlds?
There's several pages usually. I was actually just working on the layout from that on them yesterday, and they're usually in the 3 to 6 page range. So they're a bit more than these like one sheets they have in Savage Worlds, but they're not as detailed as the 7 main plot beats.
And with each of those main ones, are they akin to an act, or would several of them fall within like a 3-act structure of the overall campaign for?
I would say they're more akin to an act in that sense. They all kind of like change up the status quo in some way, but it's they kind of collectively set that overall arc.
I can certainly get that. Now, when it comes to the, I know that you are planning on having a bunch of NPCs within it, but I am curious if with some of them you have GM advice on how to vary them.
There's in the chapter that contains advice for the GM and the other secrets of what's going on in the city. Mm-hmm. There are recommendations for how to switch things up, or if one of these NPCs does not work out for some reason, how to go about replacing them in a way that's not going to run the campaign entirely into the ground or off the rails or whatever, however you want to phrase that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can get that. And when it comes to advancement, I know because of the freeform nature that'd be a bit tricky with Age of Ambition. But what would you say would be the range of experience that you're expecting characters to have coming in and coming out of this particular adventure?
All right, so to begin with, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. So if you were dividing your general characters up into sort of like novice, experienced, very distinguished, and then kind of building up towards renowned or legendary or something like that. But they're kind of coming in experienced into a little more distinguished, and then they should end more or less on the doorsteps of legendary, if you're thinking of characters in that sort of set of tiers.
Yeah, and I phrase it as tiers because if I phrase it as levels, that would get a bit distracting for some.
Yeah, that's the overloaded term.
That and it would put in this idea of a level range for this kind of adventure. And first off, there's not really a level setup with the character setup in the game. So
that's true.
It would be. I mean, some games like the aforementioned Savage World have a kind of tier system. That's one approach. I know something like the Cypher system definitely has more of a tier system than traditional levels, even if some claim otherwise. But
yeah,
it's one of those things that's going to be kind of flexible. Although I've seen games like Dark Void have their adventures set up with the assumption of, okay, this is the amount of experience you should have when you start. So there is that for certain.
Mm-hmm.
Or if if one prefer English. I suppose. I mean, there is the experiences approach with Age of Ambition, but I think using that would be a bit tricky. But with that in mind, one of the tricky things that can happen with modules is going a bit linear, especially when you're dealing with something that has a defined beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah.
So, within the individual scenarios, do you have certain options to branch off, not just in the form of these side quests, but if say a certain character didn't survive a previous encounter, then here's how to adjust or something like that?
For each of the faction leader NPCs, there is absolutely a Plan B character that is discussed in the GM section, and many times is referenced elsewhere, even if they don't have as big of a role. This way, they're not just like, stepping up out of the blue. Your character has some, the players have some context for who this person is that's stepping in to fill the void.
I can certainly get that. Now, with that in mind, what would you be shooting for as far as a release window for the book?
I mean, I'm hoping to get the PDF sent out to backers by the end of the year, and then the print versions will probably be sent out a couple months after that.
Alright, I can get that. And as far as page count, stretch goals notwithstanding, what would you be shooting for?
192 pages. And having been working on the layout recently, that will be accurate within to about 8, give or take 8 pages, but it'll be right around there.
Alright, I can certainly get behind that. Well, I do want to sincerely thank you once again for taking the time out of your schedule to brave time zone hell to come all the way to my temple. And anytime you see fit to return, the door is always open. As I often say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged.
Thank you for having me.
And of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there will be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.
Soi, 上洛が上長